Hi, Nan.
Hi there. Hi,
How are
everyone.
you?
Hi.
We're so glad you're here. We've been chatting about your book and how much we enjoyed it, and we can't wait to chat with you about it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, and thanks for reading an early version.
Yeah, it's really fun to get to
Everyone.
do this and chat early and be one of the first groups to chat with you about it. So we all enjoyed that.
Awesome.
Good. Well, we'll start out with just a super easy softball. Tell us a little bit about how you did, like where you came up with the ideas. Like, where did you get the inspiration for this book?
So there were a bunch of different inspirations. The first is, I don't know if you can see my ring, but my engagement ring from my husband is an antique ring from the 1800s, and it's from France, and that's all we know about it. And I just have always wondered about the woman who wore it before me, or multiple women who wore it, and what their lives were like. So that was kind of the very beginning idea for the story. And then I've always wanted to tell kind of a historical ghost story with a little bit of a hint of reincarnation. So I kind of had that idea mostly because there's a photograph that my husband has of his grandfather in 1941 at the Naval Academy with Franklin Roosevelt. And when you look at the picture, he's standing next to Roosevelt and he's a spitting image of my husband. I mean, I would think it was my husband. It's this old black and white photo. And so then that kind of gave me some ideas about reincarnation. And then I had a really hard time kind of finding my voice, finding my passion, my raison d'etre in life. And part of that was I basically dated the flotsam and jetsam of the boyfriend world. And I have so many stories of the horrible men and boys that I dated in my life, and kind of what I was willing to put up with in life. And this story is kind of a book I wish I'd read in my 20s and early 30s, and also one I can read now in my 50s and look back on and think, God, that journey to finding yourself is really, really hard. Also, like, kind of quieting the voices in your head that tell you you're not good enough, those kind of things in your life. And so I wanted to write a story kind of about a character who goes through that journey and finds her passion, and also finds a way to not only look for silver linings in life when it starts out difficult, but be a silver lining in life, because that's something that's important to me that I try and do in life. I don't always succeed. And the last little part of the story is that I'm a huge proponent of animal shelters, rescue. We grew up with rescue beagles who were rescued from medical facilities. And we had 3 in a row that we all named Pippi Longears. 2 immediately didn't make it because they're so sick when they come to you. And so I wanted to tie this book in, shine a light on some rescue work in animal shelters, and then I'm donating a percentage of my personal pub day sales to the Pixie Project, which is this amazing shelter in Portland, Oregon, that works really hard to match the right people up with the right animals so they don't have animals coming back. So that was a long answer, but in a nutshell, all those things kind of wove their way through the story.
Well, we were talking about the animal aspects, and several of us are big animal lovers, and we were curious. We figured you must have some connection to rescues and animals, and we all loved Growler.
Oh, I'm really glad. Like, Growler's a little bit like my dog right now, who wasn't a rescue, but he was, because he was kind of a reject from a breeder who didn't want him. And so we took him, and he has a ton of behavioral issues. If anyone else had taken him, and I post Boone all the time on my Instagram and pictures of him. He looks so cute, but he's cute like 90% of the time, and 10% of the time he's, we have to mitigate always. And so I understand what it's like to devote yourself to an animal and to work nonstop trying to help them through their behaviors, basically. So yeah, it's a huge part of my life.
Oh, that's great. We had a rescue, a terrier, and we had her for years, but even, years after we'd had her, nobody ever laid a hands on her. You still get too close to her too fast and she would, immediately shake. And you just thought, oh, that's so terrible. She's lived with us so long, knows we would always treat her so well. And still that abuse, is remembered so many years down the road. It's heartbreaking.
It really is. And it just takes people to say, I'm not going to give up, on them and love them despite. And it really kind of reflects on Constance too, on just people who are discarded in life and Mars and who just need a second chance or a third chance or a fifth chance, but are all super deserving of finding their person or their forever home or whatever that might be.
Well, and you mentioned the reincarnation, and I was working through some of the reading guide questions. And the last one was, do you believe it's possible that Constance and Ellis are reincarnations of Anna and James? So do you think they are?
Well, I kind of want to know what you all think.
I didn't even think about that as I was reading the book. It just wasn't one of those things that crossed my mind. So then I got to the question and I thought, so I had to kind of go back and think through it, but I don't know that I've really thought much about reincarnation. So I don't know.
Well, I had to be very light-handed with it because I don't want it to definitely be a reincarnation story or not, or be a ghost story or not. I always want to, even with my last novel, some of it was real, which is a psychic and a journalist who's trying to prove she's a fraud. I don't really come out either way. Do I believe in psychics? Don't I believe in psychics? I just kind of present, and then you can take the leap or not take the leap. It's not integral to the story. It doesn't really matter. But if you love a little magical twist, a little dust, a glitter, you can go that way if you want.
I like that. I was just sort of curious where you came down on it.
Yeah, I mean, where I come down on it is just kind of in the middle. I love the idea. I think, if you've ever loved anyone or any pet in your life, right, you kind of have this part of you that wants to believe there's another shot, another chance with them. So I come down on the I want to believe there's another chance side.
I like that. Well, who has questions? I don't want to just monopolize the whole time. Does anybody want to ask anything? Jada?
I wanted to ask about your historical research for the letters. I know you mentioned at the back in the acknowledgement some of the ways you research, but I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, it's so much fun. Like, one of the most fun things for me as an author is just going down a rabbit hole. Like, I really didn't know. I knew that there was going to be someone tied to the ring, and that it was going to be historical, and there was going to be a book of some sort. But I had no idea when I started that it was going to turn out to be letters. And it's just, as I started kind of researching World War I, World War II, it kind of made sense to me to create a love story. And because of the ring and its history, that World War I was the right time. And then one of the coolest things that I didn't know anything about was all about the female nurses and physicians who came over from the United States and other countries who were only allowed to treat only allowed to treat women and children and not allowed to treat men. And it was so fascinating to me that they actually came over, risked their lives, not only to prove that they were good enough and capable enough, but also to earn the right to vote. And so that as you're like going through and researching all the history, you learn all these other things that you can then create subplots in a story that you don't even know is going to reflect all your themes until you just discover it doing research, which is one of the most fun things about being an author, is being able to do that and go down those rabbit holes.
Is it hard to rein yourself in on that and decide what to include, what not to include?
It is. I want to include everything. I find like that kind of research so fascinating, and I feel like everyone should find it so fascinating. And then my husband's always my first reader, and he's like, too fascinating, too much. Kind of rein it back in, because it's just, I get all this information and I just think everyone should want to know this, right? But that's why I kind of include books in the back that people can read about that, because it's really inspirational.
Did you have fun writing the letters? And then did you write the letters all at once? Did you write them as you wrote the book chronologically? How did that work for you?
Originally the letters were much longer, which is always my problem. But I loved writing them. I wanted to kind of give Constance something to inspire her towards a healthier relationship, to see a man who is willing to make his person his family versus allow his family of origin to decide who he loves. And the way that James was so devoted to Anna became something that Constance ultimately wanted in her life. A lot of, originally as I wrote it, I had her kind of falling real time and seeing herself as Anna in the story, but it was a little too jarring to read it that way. I think I had to cut the letters a little shorter so that you could stay in the present story, and just show her a little bit kind of falling into that world and kind of starting to imagine, what if I was Anna, or what if someone treated me like Anna? But I loved writing those letters and trying to get kind of the cadence of writing in that time frame down, so that it was a fun part of the process.
I bet it was. We spent a while talking about how much those type of letters in our good family history and records, and that we just don't do that today, and how interesting it is to go back and find them from your relatives and just discover things that happened then. It's
really fun. I just a fun little story. My dad, my whole life, he when he worked, he wrote on a lined yellow pad. And so in college, he would send me these long letters, like 4, 5, 6 pages, telling me whatever. And I actually saved all of that. And it's really cool to go back and read them. He was very worried about me. I was having a great time in college, probably too great of a time. But it's sad. I mean, we have emails and stuff, right? And there's records of things in Instagram. There's different ways of records, but handwritten letters are just so cool to receive, to open, that, I'm glad at least I have those.
Yeah, for sure. Does anybody else have anything they want to ask?
I have a question.
Sure.
So one of the things that shocked me the most in the book was when Anna died and the baby with her, because I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting the gentleman at their house, their childhood house, to somehow be revealed to be that child. Was there ever a thought to have that happen, or why? I guess I didn't understand why Anna died before James.
Yeah, sometimes when you're writing, it just feels right to have something happen. I think, one of the things you try and do is surprise your reader, and surprise your reader in an organic kind of way. And you're all, James is going to die. And James is going to die right from the beginning. And so it becomes more powerful, I think, for Constance to realize that nothing is given, time is limited. There's no promise of a happily ever after, and that living in the moment, forgiving people, moving on, letting go of past hurts, all those kind of things become much more powerful when you're confronted with like what you thought was going to happen didn't happen. So it was like another way to move Constance forward in life.
Okay.
But I'm sorry she died. And I'm really sorry your son died too. But sometimes when you're writing, you're just like, but yeah, that's the next right move. And you have to make it.
Thank you.
Well, and Lynette mentions the man that was on the doorstep. So was that anybody? I mean, was he real? Was that something that just appeared to her? Like, what was the story there?
So you're talking about the stable master who appears in her dreams as well.
Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Yeah. To me, he is my only, for sure, real ghost in the entire story. And the way I look at it is like, you can believe in the reincarnation, or you can believe that there are beings kind of tied to the ring and to her journey, who, when that ring goes to a new person, are kind of alerted to their presence. And I feel like he knew she was reading the letters. He knew what her journey was, and he was kind of trying to help her along the way. And he shows up at the very end too. You smell cigar smoke. So to me, he's the only real ghost in the entire story. And originally he wasn't there. And Carrie, my editor at Berkeley, she wanted me to soften the reincarnation. So I said, yep, I can do that, but I need a real ghost that I can feel like is in the story, just to weave a little more magic into the story.
So that's interesting that you mentioned the cigar smoke, because I always assumed, though, I guess when you wrap it up and it's Ellis, not James writing like I wasn't sure who was writing the letters, and then you learn it's Ellis, but I kind of just always assumed the cigar smoke was related to James. So that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's related to the man she meets on the steps, who's the stable master, who in my mind is the only person who truly loved James other than Olivia. Like his parents saw him as, someone who needed to marry well and be part of the business. And, they had a lot of control over him, whereas the stable master just saw his love of horses and wanted to support that and to just encourage him to follow his heart.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad that we asked that question. And then tell me about your editor wanting to soften the reincarnation.
It's just one of those things. I mean, you write, like the editing process, it's iterative. You write a book, like for me, I write a book, I gave it to a couple beta readers, then it goes to my agent, Steph Kiproston, who's an editor herself. Like she worked for an editor at a major publishing house. She was an editor at a major publishing house. So she's fantastic. And then it goes to your editor at your imprint, and you never know what they're gonna like, what they're not gonna like. They're also thinking about the market. I'm an outlier at Berkeley in that my stories aren't just like a single trope, or you can't really sum them up as just like, oh, it's a meet cute, or it's a hate to love. There's always going to be in what I write a little magic and a mystery, because for me as a reader, that's what I like. I like complicated stories that you don't necessarily know everything. It's open to interpretation, that there's not a definitive happily ever after, that there's a version of happily ever after. Like her grandfather's always gonna have dementia, animals are gonna be euthanized at other shelters. Hopefully her love will last, but so you just never know what's going to happen in the process and what they're going to ask you to do. And you push back on certain things, like I want a ghost, and you give on other things like, okay, I can put enough reincarnation in for me. So if someone's into that, they'll read it and they'll say, hey, wait, James has the same jawline as Ellis, and her eyes, Constance's eyes are the same color, or you can reject it.
I'm always just so curious how all of that works. So thank you for answering that one.
Yeah,
and then
of course.
Angie has a question. I'm going to read it for her.
Sure.
She says she'd love to know about your prior job as a writer for the Ringling Brothers Circus. I did not even know that you were a prior writer, so I'm so glad Angie knew this and asked it.
Yeah, so Ringling Brothers was my first job out of college, and I traveled with the red unit of the show. There are two colored units, a red and a blue. And the red is the major city one, and then the blue is the minor. So once they go to the major cities, the next year they go to the minor cities, and then they remake the show again with new things. So I traveled with the show, not on the train, and I wrote stories about performers and wild animals that are being trained. We're not supposed to say tamed, but it is tamed. So I worked there for, probably a year and a half. And then my job kind of morphed into, I started like taking press through the back of the arena, and they would ask questions like, why are the elephants swaying? And I would say they love the music, but it's because they're chained by the ankle in a line and they're going slowly crazy. So once I did that a couple times, I quit. Because I just couldn't do it. And I kind of promised myself, like, I'm going to do something to shine a light on wild animals in captivity and circuses. And so my first young adult novel is called When Elephants Fly, and it shines a light on what happens in small circuses. It's not just about elephants, it's about a young woman who has a family history of the mental health condition schizophrenia, and she's trying to live a super careful life, And then she becomes a caretaker for a baby elephant who has been rejected by its mother. That elephant is reclaimed by a small circus. She goes along to help it get used to the new environment, realizes it's going to die in that circus, and goes on this desperate road trip to save the elephant calf's life and kind of find her own version of freedom along the way. So that's what came out of working for Ringling Brothers. So I feel good about that, but not. And the job was kind of cool. I mean, I learned to juggle. I learned to walk on a low wire. They wouldn't let me swing on the trapeze, even though I wanted to. But yeah, it was a pretty cool first job.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And they just recently, in the last few years, do they not do their
They're
circus?
done.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, but I believe that the elephants that they have are being housed in Florida and being used for medical research, from what I understand. Because there are certain diseases that elephants don't get that we do, that they're trying to figure out. But hopefully it's better conditions.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, anybody else have a question that they want to ask?
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm just kind of curious with Constance's relationship with her father and how having a difficult parent, forms you as an adult. And you seem to really write that well. And I don't know if this is too personal of a question, but did you have some personal background with that? Because I know I do, and I really resonated with her character a lot in that way. And I just kind of wondered the inspiration or the story behind that part.
Yeah, I didn't have parents who were anything like the parents in this book. My parents are very kind people. That said, I'm not sure, especially my mom was super emotionally equipped. And there are things that your parents say to you when you're young, if you are someone who is really sensitive, that form your core beliefs about yourself. And something that my mom always said when she was mad at me was, I love you, but I don't like you. And for me, for my sister, she was just kind of like, well, I don't like you either. But for me, I've spent the next 3 decades trying to make everyone like me, because I just assume that my core belief is that, and even now, like I'm sitting in front of you guys and I'm like, please like me, and I write books and I'm like, please like me, and I just think that we all have experiences that form our core beliefs of who we are. And we carry those into adulthood. And in every book I write, there's a part of that book that says, stop doing that. That whether your dad is a felon and a murderer in prison, or your mom just wasn't capable of, being the emotional support that you needed, or whatever it was, it's like, there's a certain point where even though that's your core belief and it's never going away, you have to act differently. You have to be a different person, right? If you want to achieve what you want to achieve in life. One of the reasons that I dated such losers was because I didn't think I deserved better. And it was only when I really started writing and having some success and feeling better about myself that I ended up marrying this wonderful guy, because I felt like I was wonderful. I also feel like I'm unlikable, but I also feel like I'm a pretty great person too. And so that kind of changes your life. So like, if there's one like thread through everything I write, it's like, look at what those core beliefs are. And even if some of them are true, if they're not serving you, choose different. Does that answer your question?
Yes, totally. I resonate with so much of that and the whole horrible dating history. And I'm set to marry the man I'm supposed to marry this October. And I just feel all of that. Thank you.
That's awesome. Just remember, you deserve it.
Right. And I finally feel I'm at that place where I do. And I feel like a whole different person.
We could just go back and forth with bad boyfriend stories.
Oh, for years, probably we could tell these stories.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Dee, do you want to chime in at all when you were talking about the people pleaser part of it?
Well, I think she did such a great job of answering that. But I do have another question. I'm an attorney, so I knew about the law school exemption, but most people do not until Kim Kardashian. So I was kind of wondering how you came across that fact, because most people don't know that.
I didn't learn it from Kim Kardashian, but I just was trying to figure out, like, she can't afford law school. Like, how, she's very driven. How could I possibly, help her to achieve her dreams in a little bit more of a difficult way? Not just like oh, and Hayden's going to give her some money for law school. Like, I didn't want to like wrap it up with a bow. And I also didn't want her to be saved by a man. I wanted her to save herself. She got derailed, allowed herself to be derailed early in life by her father, but I wanted her to take control, and taking control to me isn't just going to the law school program. It's, working years because it's going to be years, right? Until she can actually make that happen. And that's okay, because she, has her passion.
I thought it was very effective. So well done.
Oh,
And I'm
thank
sure
you.
you're nervous because this is the time before the book comes out. You have nothing to be worried about. This is going to be very popular with a lot of people. So.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It's the worst time as an author, I have to tell you. It's just awful. You go to Goodreads and you're like, one person, posts like, I hate animals, DNF at 40%, 2 stars. And you're like, okay, here we go. Because, in the publishing world, like, that's what happens. It's like you can be derailed by somebody who decides you chose the wrong name for a character, or you're racist because you did something, or gosh, you used the wrong pronoun, or, and people of a certain age, it takes a little while to get used to the whole pronoun thing. Like, you make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
So thank you, Dee, for saying that. It's
No problem.
this time, and I hope people like it.
We do.
Oh, I think they definitely will. And I think you touch on a lot of things that, as Tracy was saying and others are saying, resonate with people. And I think that, it makes you think about your own life and the choices you make, and the whole thing with her father. And, you just wanted to be like, your dad is never going to get better. And, she finally gets there. And I mean, I know that's the point of the story, so it takes her a while. I mean, that's the story, but you're just so glad in the end. You're like, go Constance, I was so happy that she was able to understand her dad was just not going to change.
It's funny because I'm so happy to hear you say that. And it's funny because you get a lot of people who say, God, I hated Constance in the beginning. She's such a pushover. But you can't create an arc, an emotional arc for a character, or a journey for a character if they start out in this wonderful place. I mean, you can, and then you can ruin their life. That's another way to do it. But I tend to, like, when I'm thinking about a story, I tend to say, this is where they start, and this is where they're going to end. And now I'm going to just throw a lot of obstacles and interesting situations at my character and see how I can make her grow. So thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's I'm glad it was fulfilling in the end.
Well, and I definitely did not hate Constance. I was frustrated with her at the beginning, but I thought that was the whole point. I mean, just what you're saying, when she has to start somewhere to be able to make the changes. And I understood that. And I've met people like Constance. So, I mean, I don't think she's, she's not unreasonable or unrealistic or any of that, but I just wanted to be like, come on, like, quit,
Right.
letting
Mars
yourself
is kind of like, come on, but Mars is also super problematic and has her own issues. And I don't know about you guys, but I've had friends like Mars that are super fun and great, but don't necessarily lead you down the right road because they don't know the right road. And it was cool to me that, like, Mars, who always thought she was in charge, could ultimately see Constance as a star to shoot for. And that Constance making these really tough decisions and changes would ultimately influence Mars in her own way to kind of let go of her core beliefs, or at least move beyond them and choose more wisely what she actually wanted in life.
Yes. And I think that is the way relationships sometimes are. People you've known for a very long time, they kind of ebb and flow as to how you are paired off and who's, kind of the leader or the one setting the parameters or whatever it is. It's interesting to see how those relationships change over time.
For sure.
Well, what about, you talked a little bit about softening the reincarnation, the letters shortening, but did the book look really different in the beginning, or did it radically change, or is it pretty similar to where you started? How did that look?
It didn't look radically different, but it filled out. I felt like the first draft that I did, and so the backstory and little window into kind of the publishing world is, I got a 2-book deal. The first book is almost perfect when you sell it because you're trying, I mean, it's your big chance and you're swinging for the fences and your agent's read it and it's been parsed through a million times. Your second book, that doesn't happen. Your second book, when you get a 2-book deal, you have a year. And the publisher, Berkeley's very clear on the kind of books they want to publish. So I had an idea for a book, and originally they were like, that's a cool idea. So I just went ahead and wrote it. And then when I sent an outline, they said, that's a cool idea, but it doesn't fit where we want you to go for your next book. So then I had to come up with a new story idea, which doesn't grow on trees because like everyone has a cool idea. Like someone will say to you like, I have the best idea for a book. Okay, someone's asleep and they hear an alarm go off and they realize it's not their clock and it's coming from the closet. Well, that's a cool first paragraph, but like, who are your characters? What's their backstory? What's their journey? Where are they going? Like, what's the plot? Like, what's your vehicle? So I gave Berkeley like a list of 10 ideas. They didn't like any of them. Then I gave them 5 more ideas. And at the very end, I was talking to my agent. I'm like, Steph, I'm just going to throw in like 2 sentences about this idea that this woman who gets an engagement ring and is unsure about her fiance, researches the ring, discovers that the guy tied to it is an author of some sort, writes him a note and he writes her back. And that was like 3 sentences. And they came back that day and said that one. And then I had 4 months to get in my first draft. And so like I work really fast, and that's partially from working for the circus and being on deadline. And I also used to write sport autobiographies where I co-wrote with an athlete. So like those were fast. I wrote Star Wars books. Those had a quick deadline. But 4 months is fast for a full like 400-page kind of novel. So the first draft was kind of like a spine. And then I worked on it with Steph, my agent, and then it went to Berkeley. And then Carrie came back and said, we need a subplot. And that's where like the historical part of women working for the military and running hospitals in France and stuff came in. So I would say it just kept getting more and more meat on the bone until it became a full novel. And that took 2 rounds with my editor at Berkeley, which is pretty normal to have happen. I was just really thankful that I write quickly. And also I learned, 2-book deals sound really great, but they are also, there's a lot of pressure to get that next one out. So you better have a pretty well thought out idea before you take that deal.
That's really interesting to hear how that process worked for you. I've often heard people say that about their second book, because the first one you've spent so long on, you've had this idea, you kind of started, you've, like you said, gotten it almost perfect. And
Right.
So then having to then turn around and do the second book would be a lot harder.
Right. And it's so scary because you want your editor, you want to be liked, but you want your editor to love, that second book. Right. And so it's a fair amount of pressure, but I always remind myself like I get paid to like use my imagination and write a story. So that's a trade-off.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have a question they want to ask? I don't want to be the one hogging all the questions.
I wondered if you could tell us about the evolution of your title. And did you always have this in your mind as you wrote it? Was it your first choice? Was there any negotiation that happened with the title selection?
Titles are the hardest thing in the world for me. I can write 400, 500 pages, but you ask me for a title or a synopsis, and it's really, really hard for me. So it was one of the titles on my list. It's something that I think about in my life of trying to look for silver linings. Like you guys can't see, but I'm icing my knee right now because I tore my meniscus and had surgery. So I was like, how do I decide that this happened for me, not to me? So I'm like, that title resonated with me, but that is the only title of all my books that I've ever picked. And I've published like 12 or 13 books now. And every single other book, they're like, no. And that was just one of a bunch of titles that they said, okay, that one actually makes sense. And then I had to go through the story and just make sure that there were little hints of that throughout, so that it would kind of resonate with the reader. Do you guys like the title, or is it like Is it a title that makes you want to read it, or? Yeah, no?
Yes.
I was just trying not to be the only one speaking. I feel bad. I don't want to be the only one talking. So I was trying to let other people talk.
Yeah.
Anything that has the word book, silver linings, I'll read it.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
So it was good. And the cover was really pretty.
That's what I was
I-
going to say, related to the cover. It was a good pairing.
I did. I really like that cover. The cover for some of it was real. So the way that process works, if you guys want to know, is that the art department will come up with a bunch of ideas and they'll send them to you. And then you'll say like, well, I like that, or I don't like that. And you kind of narrow it down, but then it goes to the sales department. And at a publishing house, the sales department actually has the final say over your cover. So I was just really lucky that I liked this cover from the beginning. I said, could you put like a ponytail on the girl, you know, and make the guy look a little old fashioned, and they gave him like the old fashioned kind of hat. But I was really happy with it. Some of it was real. We had tons of different covers, and they really wanted a crystal ball on the cover. So that was the way that one ended up going. It's not I like the colors and everything. It's not my most favorite, but ultimately Berkeley's really good about giving you input and making you feel like at least you have some say. I have other friends who are like New York Times bestselling authors who see their cover when it's revealed online. So I felt really lucky they at least let me be part of the process. And it's fun to see it's really fun to see what they come up with, like what inspires them. I'm not an artist, so I don't try and say too much, because ultimately, like, that's what they do. Like, so when I got married, my husband and I went and talked to the chef at the place where we got married, and he's like, okay, what do you guys want, or whatever. And we knew he was like super creative and like raises his own pigs and all that kind of stuff. And we said, just make sure there's some vegetarian dishes because I'm vegetarian. And he was like, what, really? But he just knocked the ball out of the park, because we just said, do what you're passionate about. Like, he didn't like making wedding cakes. So we're like, well, do what you're passionate about. And he made like all these crazy cool desserts and stuff. And so that's how I look at it, like with the art department, is like, I want them to be super excited and passionate and do it. And then I can always say, hey, tweak this or do that.
I always think it's totally fascinating that the sales department has the ultimate say, and that you can be all the way down the road in this cover process, love a cover, and then have to start over again if the sales department's not on board. It's really interesting. And I get it, because they know what they're doing, but it's just interesting. It's not something I would have ever known before I was involved in all this.
Yeah, they do know what they're doing. They also know like colors, you know, they're looking at the big picture, like what books are coming out. What's going to look good when we do a sweepstake? If every book is blue, that's not going to work, you know? So they're thinking on such a bigger scale than what we're thinking. But it is one of the most fun parts of the process when you get that email and you can look through their ideas.
Well, and I think of silver linings so much more after COVID, because I feel like that's one of the things you have to think about is like, okay, it was a terrible time, but there were some silver linings. So I always kind of thought about that with your cover as well, because I think that's an expression that we've all used a lot more in the last couple of years than before that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's really, really true. It seems like a bad dream almost, but I know it's still going on. I mean, I see this woman when I go walking who still doesn't have her sense of taste and smell back, you know? So it's like, I know it's still going on, but the terror of it when no one understood what it was or how it could affect us or whatever is thankfully tamped down.
Yes. And I think you just have to think that for every horrible thing that happens, there are some positives that come out. And so I think, you know, that's something that people have focused on a lot in recent times.
Oh yeah, and being the positive, like how can I be the positive in this situation, whether it's like all the people who went to rescue shelters and adopted dogs and cats, you know, things like that. It's I saw something posted the other day that I thought was super cool too. The people who go to animal shelters when there's going to be fireworks or a thunderstorm and just sit with the animals during that process. It's like such an easy way to be a silver lining in life. You don't have to be a foster or rescue home, but you can, you know, just help.
Yeah, do small things that actually end up being bigger things.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what about what's on your bedside table to read, or what you've read lately that you really liked?
Oh, I'm always reading like 5 books at a time. I just went on a TJ Klune deep dive. I hadn't read The House on the Cerulean Sea and I loved it so much, or Under the Whispering Door. Then I just started reading Sally Hepsworth, the crime thriller. She's a Melbourne author. Love those. Read The Ferryman, Justin Cronin. That's one I tell everyone to read because he's a master plotter. You know, there's this test that you do when you're editing your book where you look at the end of a chapter and you say, is the next chapter a then or a but or a therefore? If it's a then you're kind of it's just something else that happens. If it's a but or a therefore, it's like super dynamic. And every chapter that you read of his, like every plot point that's in there matters. And every chapter propels you to the next. So I love his writing, even if he's not sci-fi, but I just like I love Stephen King. Like I sometimes just reread Stephen King and not necessarily, there are some throwaway ones that probably he wrote younger and they get published, but you know, I read like The Shawshank Redemption, which is one of the best novellas I've, ever read, or I love The Stand or Salem's Lot, like just the way he develops characters. So I do a lot of rereading sometimes as well, but anything anyone tells me to read like ends up on my TBR and I end up getting to it. When I'm actually actively writing, I only read outside of whatever genre I'm writing in because I'm afraid to like pull things. The other book that I reread probably once every couple of years is The Sparrow and Children of God, which is Mary Doria Russell. And The Sparrow is about a Jesuit mission to an alien planet because on Earth they've heard music and you can't have an intelligent being, right, who can't create music. So they take an asteroid to this planet. It's all about perspective, and Mary Doria Russell's a beautiful writer. And then the second book basically challenges everything you believed in the first book. So I kind of go all over the place. I read survival stories, I read memoirs, anything and everything, because if you're only just writing, even your vocabulary becomes smaller and smaller, and you tend to return to kind of similar terms of phrases. And it takes reading other authors' works and seeing how their minds work and their imagination and inspiring yourself for me to, keep writing stories.
I always enjoy hearing what people have read, what they like to read, what their process is like for that when they're writing, if they read all of that.
I have some friends who can read a lot of books while they're writing. I can't do that quite as much, just because there's a lot to keep track of. And even when you read a story and it's like, oh yeah, it's woman, a ring, whatever. But like, if you would see like the wall in front of me of like trying to keep track of dates and times and when things happen and characters, and then I'm writing the next novel as I'm editing the last novel. So I'm trying, like I reread this book yesterday just because I'm in the process of editing the next novel. And so I wanted to make sure I had the characters right. Because you do tend to, I've asked other authors, I'm like, do you remember everything that happens in your books? And they all say the same thing. They're like, no, I was doing whatever and I forgot my main character's name, or I forgot, the dog's name or whatever. So you have to keep, you just have to keep reminding yourself. Otherwise, you kind of just drop them. I feel bad, but you drop them and just move on to the next.
Well, and I think the way the publishing industry works, you just mentioned this, a lot of times you're editing your next book right as you're launching your current book. So It is so confusing. And then people want to know about your past book if they read it because they really loved it. And so, yeah, there's a lot to keep up with. And it's all, I'm sure pinging around in your head.
It definitely is. I try really hard. If I don't remember something, I always say, what did you think?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, does anybody else have any questions?
I want to know if you can tell us anything about your new book.
Oh, good one.
Sure. So right now it's called The Journals, but that'll change because they won't like my title. It's about twins who their mom, when they're 6, gives them journals and says, write 5 things that you're certain of every year of your life and promise me when you turn 30 that you will meet up again and go through this book of certainty of all the things you're certain of for the gift of perspective. And so the mom actually, this isn't going to ruin anything, ends up passing, and the twins end up, separating, but they have to come back together to share these books. And it's all about how people grow apart, the assumptions you make, the perspective shifts through life. And my main character, Lilu, has to come back and take over her brother's business because he becomes ill. And it's through that process that she kind of discovers who she is and what she wants in life and kind of the missteps that she's made. There's also an animal safari and a giraffe named Vegas, and lots of other things going on. But and I don't have like a really easy summary for you right now because I haven't worked on it. Those things take me time. But basically, it's about perspective and perspective shifts. And there's a sexy artist in it named Cosmo, and obviously some romance, but it's more of women's fiction than, it's definitely not rom-com. Nor was this book. I mean, but I always feel like I have to say that because I'm with Berkeley, so I feel like I want people to not expect a rom-com coming from me.
Well, and
Sounds
that's an
great.
interesting
Can't wait.
distinction. I'm sorry. That's an interesting distinction because I do think there are so many rom-coms, and then there's the romance, and then there's some of this other. And so sometimes you have to be like, it's not a rom-com, it's just a romance with maybe other elements as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm good friends with Tracy Garbus Graves, who's an author. I don't know if you guys know her, but she wrote On the Island and Her Writing a Love Song. And we always talk, because we're very similar in our style of writing and in kind of what we want to write. And we always talk about how we want to write contemporary fiction, women's fiction, but with our own version of whatever the happily ever after is, and without like a very specific tropes. And so a lot of times, as an author, you have to make a choice. You can make a choice to fit really in a box, and that serves you super well because people know, like Ellen Hildebrand, you know what to expect from her. Jill Santopolo, and it's a weird thing to face, like making that decision and thinking, okay, I could do that. But for me personally, part of this whole writing thing is just like a journey of discovery, and I don't know what I'm going to write next, and I want to surprise myself, and then I want to surprise you with that, and it might not lead me to be like a New York Times bestselling author, but I want you to finish what I read. My dad used to always finish a book, and if he loved it, he would say that was a great yarn well told, and that's what I want. I want you to finish it, want to read through it, like never be bored, and then say that was a great yarn well told. And if you take anything away from it other than that, I'm thrilled, but that would be enough.
I like that. And then I talked over somebody a minute ago, and I don't know who it was. If somebody had a question they wanted to ask or something, I'm sorry. No? Okay, good. So sometimes it's hard to see with Zoom and different people popping up. So, well, any last questions before we let Nan go?
No, just thanks. This was fun.
Yeah,
like
thank
it
you
more
so
now
much,
even than-
Nan. We really appreciate your time. It was really fun to
Absolutely.
get to chat and learn more of the behind the scenes.
Well, thank you, all of you. And if you have time to post a review on Goodreads, that would be fantastic, or get the word out, because pre-sales are super important right now, because I want to donate as much money as possible as I can to the Pixie Project. And I'm just doing that myself. So the more pre-sales there are, the more I can donate. So any way you guys can help get the word out, I totally appreciate it.
I have a question about that.
Sure.
Because is there any way we can get an autographed copy of your pre-sale so you can donate that money?
Oh, that's so sweet of you, but I would never like charge you for an autograph or anything. If
No,
you,
I'm saying for like if you sign a copy.
oh, yeah, I don't even know how I would kind of do that. You could just go to the pixieproject.org and donate, but anybody who does want an autographed, copy, I have book plates that I sign. And if you just email me at nanfisherauthor@gmail.com, it's on my website, send me your address and I'll pop one in the mail. can
Perfect.
put it in your book if you want.
And are you going on any kind of tour or anything?
No, I'm doing a lot of like Zoom stuff, but going places, really only the huge authors are kind of going places. I could design it and I could make myself look more special and make people think I'm going to Seattle and I'm going to California, but I would just be paying to, fly myself to all those places. I usually do an event at Powell's Bookstore in Portland. I'll do an event in my small town that I live in. But other than that, not really. I'm doing an appearance on KOIN News in Portland next week at the Pixie Project. I'm hoping mostly they'll talk. I have only been on TV a couple times, so I don't even know what I'm going to wear, and I'll be super nervous. So I'm hoping that the important thing is to shine a light on them and to get pre-sales so they get more donations. I really didn't realize after COVID how overburdened animal shelters have become, and they're like one of the only ones in Portland that doesn't euthanize and doesn't say no and stuff. So I'm hoping they can get a bunch of attention from this.
And I was mainly asking because I didn't know where you'd be signing books, so people can order from Powell's too if they want to get a signed copy. That's what I was trying to.
So if you go on my website and just click on the signed books, it's just nanfisherauthor.com. I'm signing them at my local bookstore to give my independent bookstore as much business as possible. And then they'll just send them to you and they'll arrive, I think, before Pub Day.
That's what I was trying to get to. Sorry, I just didn't, because I know sometimes people want an actual signed copy and I knew you had to be going to a bookstore near you. So that's great. That's perfect. And we can direct people that way if they want to do it too.
For sure.
So did you say you were going to have an event at Powell's?
If they want, they're willing to do it. I did it last summer and it was like 108 degrees.
Oh,
and 6 people came.
yeah.
And I had a wonderful conversation with the moderator, but I kind of don't know if that's like the best use of my time. I kind of feel like it's better to just keep writing. Why are you in Portland?
I'm in Portland, yeah. And
well then maybe you would have come.
Yeah, I'll come.
But I am going to do an event in Hood River.
Okay.
So I'm going to do a book
Hood River?
signing. Yeah, that's where I live. And so I'm going to do a book signing there on one of our first Fridays.
Okay. And what's that? I know that bookstore.
It's Wacoma.
Yeah, Wacoma. Okay.
And I'll be posting when I know the exact date. I think it's going to be the 3rd week in August. Okay. But you can also order a book from Wacoma and I'll sign it, personalize it, and everything for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
But now that I know that you're in Portland, I know at least maybe one person will come.
Yep. Yes, you do.
I love Beach Books. That's in Seaside.
Oh yeah, that's a great bookstore.
I actually order from them regularly. I visited there when we were on a trip and I just loved it. And so I kind of befriended them. And so when I order from indie stores, I often order from them.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's so great to order from indie stores. I mean, I never discourage anyone from ordering from Amazon too, because I order from Amazon too. But if I can, I try and order from the indie bookstore.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you again, Nan. Thank you, everybody else. Glad you're all here.
Thank you.
So
Yes,
yeah, everybody have a great rest of the week. And if you're in the South, stay cool.
Yes, you stay cool.
For sure.
Bye.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much for having
again.
me. I really
Thank
love
you.
talking to all of you.
Absolutely. It was so much
Thank
fun.
you.
Thanks, Nan.
Bye, guys.
Enjoy your puppy.
Bye.
Thank you.